Steam locomotive wheels are not riddled with holes by accident. Those cutouts saved entire railway networks from tearing themselves apart. In the race for speed, early locomotives became unbalanced monsters, battering the tracks, shaking bolts loose, and forcing teams to rebuild rails after every run. The official story blames raw power, but that is only half the truth. Why did engineers drill into solid steel? Your assumptions about what keeps these giants on the rails are about to be overturned, because each hole tells the story of disaster averted and reveals physics most people never even notice. A steam locomotive in motion is a study in controlled chaos. At its core, the engine's power comes from pistons, heavy metal cylinders that slide back and forth, driven by high-pressure steam. Each piston is linked to a connecting rod, which attaches to a crank pin set off-center on the massive driving wheel. As the piston moves, it pushes and pulls the rod, forcing the crank pin to trace a circle. This is what turns the wheel and pulls the train forward. But that simple motion hides a violent secret. The piston and rod do not just spin around, they slam back and forth with each stroke, creating a force that is anything but smooth. Every time the piston reverses direction, it yanks the wheel sideways, then shoves it back again. The wheel's center is offset by the crank pin, so the mass is not balanced evenly around the axle. With every revolution, the wheel tries to throw itself left and right, straining against the rails. At low speeds, these forces are manageable. But as the locomotive accelerates, the violence grows. The faster the wheels turn, the more the off-center mass fights to break free. Vibration creeps in, then grows into a shaking that rattles bolts loose and sends tremors through the entire frame. On early engines, this unbalanced motion was so severe that wheels would slip on the rails, or worse, threaten to lift off entirely. Engineers watched as their machines battered themselves to pieces, sometimes after only a few months in service. The problem comes down to reciprocating mass. The piston, the connecting rod, and even parts of the crank pin all move back and forth rather than simply spinning. This back and forth motion creates lateral forces, sideways pushes that have nowhere to go but into the track. With every stroke, the engine hammers against its own restraints, sending energy sideways instead of forward. The result is a locomotive that rocks, sways, and sometimes bucks with enough force to damage itself and the rails beneath it. Off-center crank pins amplify the problem. Instead of a smooth wheel spinning around a perfect center, the mass distribution is uneven. As speed increases, the effect multiplies. Engineers of the 19th century soon realized that simply making parts heavier or sturdier was not enough. The forces involved scaled with speed, turning minor vibrations at 10 miles per hour into destructive oscillations at 50. Early attempts to solve the problem included wild ideas such as chains, gears, even toothed wheels, but none addressed the root cause, the raw, unbalanced nature of the steam engine's motion. Railways faced a stark reality. Without a way to tame these forces, faster trains would always come at the cost of reliability and safety. Every run risked not just the locomotive, but the very rails it ran on. The need for a solution grew more urgent with every shattered wheel and battered track. The challenge was clear: harness the power of the piston without letting the machine destroy itself from within. Engineers faced a brutal dilemma. To fight the sideways pounding from the pistons, they began adding heavy counterweights to the wheels. These thick arcs of metal, bolted directly opposite the crank pin, aimed to cancel out the worst of the side-to-side shaking. On paper, it was a clever fix. In practice, it unleashed a new kind of chaos. With every turn, the counterweights did not just spin, they rose and fell like sledgehammers. The force of their motion pressed down on the rails, then yanked upward, over and over. This was no gentle pressure. At higher speeds, each wheel could slam the track with several tons of force, then almost leap off the rail in the next instant. The problem had a name: hammer blow. Railway workers dreaded it. Tracks that should have lasted years were battered into submission in a matter of months. Crews spent their days reballasting miles of crushed stone, trying to keep the rails level after every fast run. Sometimes the pounding bent rails or loosened the spikes that held them in place. On bridges, the repeated shocks threatened the very structure, forcing railroads to impose strict speed limits. A railway historian recalls stories from the era when maintenance gangs would follow express trains, shovels and crowbars in hand, to repair the carnage left behind. You could hear the pounding from miles away. After a few fast trains, the rails would look like hammered anvils. We would be out there all night, packing ballast, tightening bolts, trying to keep the line open. The physics behind hammer blow is relentless. The faster the wheels turned, the more the counterweights acted like wrecking balls. The vertical force, the so-called vertical dynamic augment, rose with the square of the speed. Even a small increase in speed could double the pounding. Railroads quickly learned that there was a hard limit. Push past 40 or 50 miles per hour, and the rails simply could not take it. Trains had to slow down or risk tearing up their own tracks. Adding counterweights solved one problem, but created another, just as dangerous. The quest for balance had turned into a battle between speed and destruction. Every attempt to tame the locomotive's power seemed to bring new headaches for the people who built and maintained the railway. The need for a better answer grew with every battered rail and every night spent repairing the damage. The solution would have to come from a new way of thinking about weight, strength, and motion, one that could finally break the cycle of damage without sacrificing the speed and power that made steam locomotives so revolutionary. Physics has a way of making its presence known, even when it is hidden inside a steam locomotive's wheels. The real culprit behind all that shaking and pounding is the moment of inertia. In plain terms, inertia is a measure of how hard it is to spin something around an axis. The further the weight sits from the center, the more stubborn it becomes. For a wheel, the formula is I equals mass times radius squared. That means a pound of metal at the very rim of the wheel has 9 times the effect of a pound just a third of the way out. Consider a typical driving wheel from a high-speed express locomotive, one with a 3-foot radius. If you remove just 1 pound of steel from the rime, it is like taking 9 pounds off at a point only 1 foot from the center. The difference is not just arithmetic, it is exponential. As the wheel spins, the rim's mass wants to keep moving straight ahead, resisting any change in direction. The faster the wheel turns, the more that resistance multiplies. To put numbers to it, picture a 6-foot diameter driver running at 60 miles per hour. That is just over 50 revolutions per minute. The angular velocity, how fast the wheel spins, works out to about 5.3 radians per second. Now, if you cut 1 pound from the rim, the reduction in rotating energy is dramatic. The moment of inertia drops sharply, and so does the amount of energy the wheel can slam into the rails with each rotation. Engineers knew this was not just theory. It meant real changes in how the locomotive behaved on the track. Hammer blow, the dreaded vertical force that threatened to lift wheels off the rails, is directly tied to this inertia. The counterweights meant to balance the piston back and forth motion add their own mass to the rim. As speed increases, the forces from these counterweights rise with the square of the speed. Even a modest increase in velocity can double the hammer blow. By drilling holes in the wheel's center and spokes, engineers could trim away the least structurally important weight, often removing 50 to 200 pounds from each wheel. The result was a measurable drop in hammer blow, less pounding on the rails, and a smoother ride at higher speeds. The numbers tell the story. On some famous locomotives like the New York Central's Hudson's, cutting rim mass by just 10% slashed hammer blow by nearly half at top speed. The moment of inertia did not just shrink, it transformed the engine's behavior, letting it run faster without tearing up the track. This was not guesswork. Engineers used precise calculations to decide exactly where and how much metal to remove. Too much, and the wheel would crack under stress. Too little, and the pounding continued. The math was unforgiving, but it offered a clear path forward. Every hole was a calculated risk, a trade-off between strength and speed, guided by numbers and tested by experience. The physics behind those holes is not just a curiosity. It is the reason steam locomotives could reach their full potential without shaking themselves and the rails to pieces. In the heart of a locomotive restoration shop, the work is equal parts tradition and precision. The foreman, hands stained with oil and eyes sharp from years of experience, stands over a massive steel wheel clamped to a boring mill. The blueprint on the bench isn't just a relic, it is a roadmap. Each mark shows where a hole will be cut, how deep, how wide, and how far from the center. The mathematics behind these decisions are unforgiving. Remove too much, and the wheel could crack under the strain of 1,000 tons. Remove too little, and the hammer blow returns, undoing all the careful balancing. The cutting tool bites into the metal, sending spirals of steel curling to the floor. This isn't guesswork. Before the first hole is drilled, the foreman has calculated the exact weight to be removed, using formulas that account for the wheel's radius and the locomotive's top speed. The moment of inertia, the wheel's stubborn resistance to spinning, depends not just on how much metal is taken out, but where. Metal near the rim counts for far more than metal near the hub. That is why the holes are clustered in the center and along the spokes, not at the outer edge. Every pound trimmed from the right spot means less pounding force transferred to the rails. The benefits go beyond physics. Once the wheel is back on the locomotive, those openings become windows for the crew. A quick glance through a hole can reveal a cracked spoke or a loose counterweight, problems that would stay hidden in a solid disc. During long runs, the holes let air move freely through the wheel, cooling the metal and helping brakes work more efficiently. In the old days, when a locomotive came in from a hard trip, the shop crew would check each wheel by eye and by ear, tapping the rim and peering through the holes for signs of fatigue or overheating. The holes made inspection faster and safer, reducing the chance of a hidden flaw turning into a disaster at speed. Manufacturing and maintenance also became easier. Lighter wheels meant less strain on the cranes and hoists needed to move them. Casting a wheel with holes required careful use of sand cores, but it saved weight and materials. When it came time to transport new wheels from the foundry to the railway, every pound saved translated into lower shipping costs and easier handling on the shop floor. For the crews who built and rebuilt these giants, the holes were not just a technical fix, they made the day-to-day work more manageable. The foreman knows that every locomotive has its own personality. Some railways preferred round holes, others oval, some favored wide slots for extra cooling. The exact pattern depended on the engine's job, the builder's tradition, and the speeds the locomotive would reach. But the principle never changed. Balance the wheel, cut only what is safe, and always respect the forces at play. The result is a machine that can run faster, last longer, and be trusted mile after mile. The holes in a steam locomotive's wheels are silent proof of the craft that keeps these iron giants alive, blending hard math with human skill in every turn of the steel. Across the world, steam locomotive wheels became a canvas for engineering creativity. No two railways settled on exactly the same way to lighten their wheels, but every solution aimed at the same problem: cutting weight without sacrificing strength. In the United States, the box-pock wheel stood out, its name a play on box spoke. Early versions featured a handful of large, egg-shaped holes between hollow, box-like spokes. Later models added more holes, each one carefully sized and spaced to preserve the wheel's rigidity while shaving off precious pounds. On the New York Central, skull and disc wheels took a different approach. Their solid centers were pierced with small, round holes, sometimes just a few per wheel, creating a look closer to a steel plate than an open-spoked design. British and European engineers often favored oval or slotted holes, stretching openings along the length of the spoke for extra ventilation and a touch of elegance. Some Australian locomotives used Y-shaped or forked spokes, splitting the difference between old-fashioned webs and modern discs. Despite their differences, all these wheels shared a common goal: balance, efficiency, and reliability at speed. Each pattern tells a story about the priorities and innovations of its builders, reflecting local materials, manufacturing traditions, and the relentless push for safer, faster trains. Proof of this engineering can be found in every railway museum and restoration shop across the world. Line up the preserved wheels from different eras and countries, and the evidence is impossible to ignore. American boxpock wheels, with their distinct egg-shaped holes, sit beside British disc wheels marked by long, elegant slots. Nearby, the Scullin wheels from New York Central display only a handful of small, round holes, yet each design arrives at the same solution: cut the weight, keep the strength, and tame the forces that threaten to tear the locomotive apart. Side by side, these artifacts lay out a history written in steel. The oldest spoked wheels, open and airy, gave way to discs drilled with precise patterns. As speeds climbed and engines grew, the holes grew larger, then multiplied, each one calculated to trim just enough mass from the right place. On some, you can see the wear marks around the holes, proof that these were not just for show. They endured decades of pounding rails and high-speed runs. Engineers and craftsmen, separated by oceans and decades, converged on the same answer. The holes are not a quirk or an afterthought. They are the physical record of a problem solved, a testament to the relentless pursuit of balance and speed. Every preserved wheel, no matter its shape or pattern, delivers the same message: the science works, and the proof is right there in the metal. Engineering isn't always flashy. Sometimes progress hides in the simplest shapes, a circle cut from steel. Today, every high-speed train, car, and jet relies on the same physics: less weight, more balance, greater speed. The principle behind those old locomotive wheels still drives innovation worldwide. The smallest details can make or break the future. If you spot one, take a closer look. It's history in motion. Thanks for watching.